I'm Dr. Richard Stewart, U.S. Army Special Operations Command historian, and I have the privilege to be talking today to Mr. Frank Gleason of the OSS Detachment 101 of China-Burma India fame from World War II. Mr. Gleason, thanks for coming today.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Could you give us sort of a quick synopsis of the different roles you performed, the different duties you were in charge of in OSS?
I'll be glad to. I started out in OSS in 1942 in the spring as a pretty new second lieutenant in the Army. And I went up to Camp B, which is outside of Washington, up in the Detachment Mountains, where the President's home is right now. In fact, it's the same place.
Camp David, Camp Ritchie.
That's where it is. That's what that Camp B is. And we were there. In fact, I was there when they built the home, and I've got distinguished another officer and I had the opportunity of blowing the rock so that they could put in the sewage line for the President's home right there.
This is part of your demolitions training?
Yes, because of our demolitions. They had built the house, then they couldn't put the sewer line in because it was all rock, so we had to come in and blow the rock, and not blow down the building, which was right there. So we drilled holes very carefully and put in some nitrous starch and blew the building, and blew the rock, and then the building was not damaged, and they took us into the President's home, and I thought that was interesting about the President's home is that where you and I have bed and where you have a nightstand, that the President of the United States had a John because he was crippled. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that.
And a lot of people at the time didn't know that.
And also they called it Shangri-La then. It was before Camp David. The President, Eisenhower, named it Camp David, but it was called, the original was Shangri-La. And anyway, we were up there, and that's where I started out in OSS. It was called Coordinator of Information when I first joined. And I learned and taught extensive demolitions work. I taught photography and, of course, extensive physical training. And then we also underwent small arms training. Now, when you went through small arms training in OSS of that area, you didn't learn to go out and shoot like you shoot on a rifle range, 200 yards or more. You could go out and shoot. You're shooting short range, 2 shots at a time, quick draw and quick response to targets. And we used to have to go through this, taught by a very famous guy by the name of Dan Fairburn, who was former chief of police in Shanghai.
A wide variety of different weapons.
Primarily the 45 is all. We didn't fire a lot of other weapons, and although as time went on, as you got different places, you learned to become familiar with other weapons, submachine guns. As I remember, there was some type of a Dutch 9mm weapon, which we did fire at from time to time, but that was, I don't know where it came from, and I don't remember ever being employed, except we used it in China. We distributed it in China. We had some in China. But from there, I went over to industrial sabotage school in England, in a place north of London, and we learned to destroy anything that had to do with power plants, communication lines, transportation systems, how to make yourself sick for the enemy, to teach our people how to become sick by getting a fever, how they could put a bar of soap under their arm and keep it down, and then they would develop a fever and say they couldn't work. So
from a bar of soap?
Yeah, just from a bar of soap.
Hadn't occurred to me.
And how they could get infections on the eye by getting contamination in the eye, and getting big sores on their eyes, so that they could say, well, they couldn't work, and they get excused. Well, that's all a form of sabotage of operations, and people couldn't work. So that's just the same as shutting down the piece of machinery that we can get. So we did that. And after I came back from England in the fall of '42, then it was not long after that, back in training again, at Camp B. Went for a short time at another camp and did some training down there and some real practice operations against enemy installations. And
another camp near?
No, it's down off the camp south of Washington on the east bank of the Potomac, and I'm not sure what its name was, D or what, over the years. It was a very small camp. and helped start it, in fact. And then I heard that the Navy was recruiting people to go to China for guerrilla operations. So I got a chance to go over there, and they accepted me to be part of the United States Naval Group China, later called SACO.
Which stood for?
Sino-American Cooperative Organization. It was a coordination between the Navy and the Chinese, and it was organized primarily to get weather information. Was one operation. The other thing they did was they would get reports from the Chinese of ships that were coming into the harbors, ships that were departing the harbors, and of course then that was sent back to Pearl Harbor, from Pearl Harbor to the submarines. The submarines could intercept these various types of vessels. So we were at these camps, and I was, well anyway, I'm getting ahead of my story. Then I went overseas in the spring of '43, and we went into 87 days on the ship. I felt like Christopher Columbus. I was captain of the commander of the troops, and we had a very mixed bag. We had a bunch of Thailanders, about 30 or 40 Thailanders, and 4 American Army officers, Leo Kowalski, Joe Lazarski, and Nicholas Smith, and I was commanding officer of troops as a senior officer at the time.
And this was
as a lieutenant,
first lieutenant,
yeah,
the senior man.
Yeah. And they handed me this envelope, and it said, open the envelope, and says that you're the commanding officer of troops, and what you will do, and if you have any trouble when you get to a port, you get a hold of the military attaché and all this kind of stuff. Well, it was brand new to me. I'd never been at sea before in my life. 21 years old, and 22 years old at the time, I guess. And so we had some naval petty officers, and we had some civilians, and we had 4 British petty officers with some PT boats that were up on the deck. They were taken over to India. Well, anyway, it took us 87 days. We went from Baltimore up to New York, and from New York down through the Panama Canal, from Panama Canal down through to Australia, and landed at Perth, and from Perth up to Bombay, and that's where we got off the ship at Bombay. I'll tell you, I never wanted to get back on a ship for years after that. It was unbelievable. People used to say, feel like Christopher Columbus, go out on deck in the middle of the Pacific and say, land 3 miles away, straight down. But it was awful. Well, anyway, then we
even in Bombay, of course, you were a long way from.
Well, we're Bombay, and then we got on the train and came on up to Calcutta, and from Calcutta, OSS people got in touch with us there. We got on a train, then got on a ship, a boat rather, and went up the Brahmaputra River, and then got off and got on a train, went up to Nazira, Dibrugarh, where we were met by Colonel Eichler and Captain Major Piers at the time, and we went to a small training camp. My job then was to, as part of the other group, was to get these Thailanders back in shape. We were, after all, water for 87 days. We were in pretty bad, physical condition for what you'd expect if someone has to operate out in the jungles. So we worked very hard and try to acclimatize ourselves in that area.
These Thais were destined to.
The Thais were destined were going to go into Thailand, and as agents in Thailand. These Thailanders were students who were studying in the United States when Thailand went to war against the United States, and some of them were royalty even, and smart as a whip, brilliant guys. And Nicholas Smith was in charge of that group, and then that went into Thailand. That's another story in itself. But then, after a while, all of the Thailanders, and Nicholas Smith and I, went up to Chongqing, China, and joined the naval group. And I just found out today the reason was it was decided that it would be better to infiltrate the Thailanders from China than it was from Burma and from India. From India, really, because the Indian were a little squeamish about it, but they had no problem with the Chinese. So we went up there, and I was training them in parachute jumping there, and then that was being held up while they were getting their logistics straightened out on that. And I went with a Major Dow, I was now promoted to captain, and we were way up on a place called Luoyang, China. Have you ever heard of Luoyang? Luoyang, it's
How far is that from Kunming?
It's east of Siam. Well, Kunming, I would say it's about 1,000 miles northeast of Kunming. And we went up by truck. I took this neighbor, and Major Dow went by. He flew up and went by train, airplane and train, because he couldn't go fly all the way
over the hump.
It was no. We're in China.
Oh yes, sir.
In China, and from Chongqing, and so I went up to a place called Baoji, got on the train, came on over to Luoyang, then from Luoyang down to our Chinese temple that we lived in, about 60 miles southeast of Luoyang, China, and there's where we were training the Chinese. They had a Chinese guerrillas that we were training from scratch. We had to build the ranges. We had to set up the classroom sessions, train with the interpreters, train our people to work with the interpreters, because teaching from English to Chinese, you just can't stand up. You can only talk in little pieces. So we were training them on
Did you have enough interpreters?
Yeah, we had to go through interpreters. We couldn't speak the language. Bad. As you see, these were a lot of firsts. No one had ever done this before. And so the people who are training now have the benefit of all this past experience, and of course they're doing a real professional job. I think, as I said, we were learning how to do it, and then we were teaching people how to do it at the same time. Very little operations went on up there. There was extreme difficulty of getting the Chinese to engage in guerrilla warfare like we wanted to.
Because the Mao Zedong and the communist guerrillas
they weren't
were
doing
doing
anything.
guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, but they did that for a while, but they weren't really doing anything. Mao Zedong, the communists during the time we were in China did nothing. And all they did was to get ready to fight the Chiang Kai-shek when the war was over.
Now, that's different than a lot of historians try to portray the Chinese communists as carrying on the war while Chiang Kai-shek did nothing.
I'm on camera. I would say to give you the real answer to that one. But they did nothing up there, but stayed up in their holes, and they stayed as far away from the Japanese as they could. Now, they might have infiltrated the Japanese from an intelligence standpoint, but there was no operations taking place. I can guarantee you that. Well, the reason that the Chinese, Chiang Kai-sheks, were not engaged in guerrilla warfare, and possibly maybe even the communists, is that the Japanese were extremely cruel to the Chinese if they were caught. They assigned them a certain section of railroad track, and if any of that railroad track was damaged, they killed the mayor and a lot of other people in the village. No questions asked. So it was extremely brutal, very brutal to the Chinese. And the Chinese, as a result, would not do anything about it. A lot of people think that the Japanese occupied all of China. They didn't. They just occupied strong points in China, the major towns. And when they wanted something, they went outside. And if there was a little, they'd move some troops over there, clean that up, and then come on back into their secure areas, you see. So they controlled China. In fact, a lot of people didn't realize that people could send mail during the war from Chongqing to Shanghai.
Even though it was
I never realized that. Our
unoccupied.
interpreter in Luoyang used to get letters from his wife in Beijing. And here we were, right on the other side of the lines. That's unbelievable. Well, we were there for a while. What we did do is we did have an operation where we got the guys to destroy a certain part of a coal mine in Honan province, and then also we blew 18 spans out of the Yellow River Bridge, going from Peking to Hankow, the main railroad, and I built a model of the bridge, calculated all the charges, and got everything all ready. And we trained the troops. We went into Zhengzhou in the middle of the night in Chinese uniforms.
You went in with them?
Yeah, with the Chinese.
How many Americans? How many Chinese?
There were 3 Americans, and we went in there and we prepared all of the charges, trained all of the troops, rehearsed, went all the rehearsal, went up to where they wouldn't let us go right to the bridge side. The Chinese wouldn't do that.
But you were in Chinese uniform too.
Of course. Of course.
You knew what was going to happen.
If we got captured, of course.
But we were in pills?
This town was essentially deserted. because there were the Japanese right there, so we made up the charges, and it would take. They were about 20. I made up 20-pound standard charges of TNT, wrapped them in a sack. Primer cord went through the thing, explosive demolition cord, and then they had a rope that they carried over their sling, and all they had to do was go tie that up. That tied the charge to the piers, and then we took the primer cord, tied the primer cord up, quickly tied it up, and got it off on a detonator and blew that sucker up. We were chased for 3 days,
on foot. I mean, there wasn't any easy way.
No, on foot. Oh, of course not. No, but they were up there looking around. Hell, we were with other Chinese. They would have had to kill everybody. They couldn't tell us from anybody. Going along the roads. The guy said we're going to go 100 miles. That's 300 li. I said, oh, they'll never do that. We did 100 miles in 3 days. I'll tell you that.
Incentive. They were.
Yeah, we were just walking along that road. I'll never forget it. I had blisters on my feet because we didn't have good shoes in those days and that kind of stuff. I had a tremendous blister on my bottom of my foot, but I survived and all that. But then OSS and excuse me.
Still in Chinese uniform.
Oh no, yeah. Then we got back. But back in the temple, Chinese temple. Then there was a schism between OSS and SACO, and they pulled the American Army officers out, and replaced us with some Marine officers.
Did they ever explain to you why?
I didn't know though. But I found out later why. Is that Donovan and Miles had a falling out over accounting for the money that was being spent. And Carl Eifert just recently told me what happened was that Donovan came over and he asked for an accounting of all the money because Miles had received a lot of money and he expected to have to answer to Congress. And Miles said it was unappropriated funds. He said they don't have to account for it. So Donovan relieved Miles, and we American OSS people were all pulled out of his organization. He had a lot of people that weren't OSS. They were Navy, strictly Navy. As I tell you, there were 2 Army officers, 18 Naval petty officers up there in that one camp.
Yeah. So, were you part of Detachment 202 while you were working with SACO?
No, I wasn't part of it.
You were part of SACO?
SACO then. And then later on, I became part of 202, Detachment 202. And I was asked to go down and set up a base, Advanced Base 21, which was down at Guilin, and where we received a group of agents again from Daili, sent these agents into us, and we trained them in industrial sabotage and guerrilla warfare, and we're trying to infiltrate them down toward the Canton Hankow area. And in fact, the guy said, "Did you have any special kind of equipment?" And I said, "Yeah. The only thing special that I remember was that we requisitioned an engineer outboard motor, one of the large size outboard motor, and I bought a Chinese junk for 45,000 Chinese dollars."
Which was equivalent to...
I bought the junk, but to get the junk, I had to hire the guy who owned it and his wife, 2 wives that he had, to run the thing. And I sent Leo Kowalski and the sergeant, who was also a radio operator, on the junk down the river. And they went down toward Hankow to set up a real forward base from which to infiltrate and get some people to go into Hong Kong and blow up these big oil tanks that they had down there. But about that time, just shortly after that, we were getting into operations. The Japanese decided they're going to split China in half and come down, and they knocked us out of those big airfields, Guilin and Rizhou.
Just stopped the B-29 raids against them.
B-29s weren't being going from there. The B-29s went from Chaba way back, from Chengdu way back in western China. But these were bases which had the fighters and the B-25 bombers who could go fly down in short range and drop bombs in the harbor at Hong Kong Canton area, And see, the Navy had pushed all the shipping up against the coast, and now our people were attacking them from the land, and the Chinese said, "The heck with this," and they knocked us out of there. Besides, they were getting ready to evacuate about 1 million men out of Southeast Asia. You knew that?
Yes.
Indochina, Thailand, Burma, and that was the only land route they had. That was the big rail line. So they knocked us out, and I was given the mission by Wiedemeyer, General Wiedemeyer at that time, to block the road for 60 days. And that meant that I abandoned my OSS business and got into strictly delay demolitions.
Blowing up everything.
Yeah, we blew up everything, over 150 bridges, and ended up with the final thing about 50,000 tons of munitions. Went off for 3 days. Unbelievable.
This was all just in front of the Japanese advance?
Yeah, we were just in front. Yeah, it started about September of 1944, and we operated and did this thing from then until close to early December. The first part of December, I think we finished up. But what the Japanese came down, knocked us out of Guilin. We were out of there for a while. Then Luzhou was open then they finally came into Luzhou, China, which we had moved to. And then we had to go on up the road toward a place called Guiyang, and that leads on into Kunming. But after they knocked us out of Luzhou, that meant they pushed our Air Force back essentially about 1,000 miles.
Mm-hmm. Really restricting the maneuvering range of the short range B-25s.
My job was to destroy those bridges so that the Japanese could not move their troops from Indochina to North China, and also to destroy their capability of coming up Guiyang a straight shot into Chongqing with enough troops.
Because that's where Chiang Kai-shek had his government.
That's where the capital. That's the capital. Yeah, and also, that's major. Knock them out of the war. They could essentially knock them out of the war. And we had other air bases in China other than Kunming, but not the biggest one was at Kunming. So that's what we did, and that essentially almost finished up my 2 years in China about that time. And near the end of that, after that operation was over and we were in Guiyang, China, they sent a Stilwell, or Wiedemeyer, not Stilwell. Wiedemeyer sent a colonel down to Guiyang, China, and who was conducting a inquiry as to whether we should continue to support the Chinese because they ran away. It was the Japanese, then us, then the Chinese army. It wasn't the other way around, you see. And so I was asked to testify, and I said, of course, we should. And they wanted to know what went on, and I explained what I just explained to you about destroying all the bridges, destroying the ammunition dump, destroying the locomotives and all this, anything that the Japanese could use, I destroyed it. And there was a man in the group who came up to me afterward, and he said he introduced himself, and he said his name was Teddy White. As you know, Teddy White was a correspondent for Time magazine, later on a very well-known author, wrote Makings of the President and all that. And he said he wanted to write an article about our operation. So he wrote this article, he came to me and he handed it to me, and he says, what do you think of it? I said, I don't like it. He said, why don't you like it? I said, because how about those other guys that were in my organization? They got mothers and fathers at home. They'd like to know a little bit about themselves. He'd written all about me, And I said, no. So he took it back and he rewrote the article, and that was published in Time magazine in the spring of 1945, I think. And side story on that, my wife's father was reading the magazine. She says, "Do you know Frank Gleason, don't you?" There was that article, they thought that was great. Well, all the other mothers and fathers thought it was great too, and I got a lot of nice telephone calls about their kids that were in it. I identified them. And he identified them in the article, which I thought was good. Then later on, as you know, he published a book called Thunder Out of China, where we talked about our operations a little bit more, but this was just me in that one. And then later on, he wrote a novel about China called The Mountain Road. And I was teaching at the Command General Staff College in about 58, and I got a telephone call from Hollywood, you know. Someone asked me whether I was Frank Gleason and was I in China in World War II. And they'd like me to come to Hollywood and do this. You know, I thought come on, you know, who's pulling, some guy's pulling my leg in or someone trying to pull a trick on me. Well, sure enough, they did, that was set up for real, and that they were going to make this movie, and Jimmy Stewart was going to play the lead part. And they wanted me to come out and talk to the director and writer, which I did. And we sat like, the three of us, we sat at a table for about 3 days. And we talked over this in detail, and of course a lot of the little stories came back. Mm-hmm. And the writer made me feel good. He said, after I hear this, he says, your stories are better than the book. I said, of course I know they are. It was unbelievable. It was like Dante's Inferno. The worst thing in a military operation is a retreat. Mm-hmm. And these people were coming up the road in droves. We couldn't hardly go the other way. I used to stop and get my interpreters and get up on the trucks and yell, so please move over to the side so we could get down and do our job.
Millions and millions of Chinese
thousands going up there, carrying everything they got, you know, on that bamboo stick with the baskets on it, and vehicles coming up of every type you could ever imagine. You know what you'd really was really surprised to see, and that is a tire with a nut and bolt through it. The first time I saw this, I said, this can't be. Here's right out of the sidewall of the tire, there's a big bolt sticking out the sidewall of the tire. Well, what they did was, they couldn't get tires, so they used to take another tire, cut a big piece out of it, come over here and piece it, and then bolt it on to the other tire. Now, when it went through the casing, it didn't go all straight through. It went like this, you know, down to the wheel, you know, and then on up in the hub part, and then around out the other side. But when you looked at it, you say, my God, it's impossible, nut and bolt. And then, of course, they always seemed to be fixing the carburetor. Every time anything went wrong, it was the carburetor. Always had the carburetor all apart. But there were just, you know, hundreds of trucks, like the old beat-up trucks. It just couldn't really make it.
Well, I know you have to rush off to a membership meeting, sir, but in conclusion, could you just sort of, based upon your experience, could you give some advice to the young man setting out to train guerrilla forces, some particularly important part of training forces?
Well, the thing that I pointed up, compared with where we were then and where we are now, is that all of the things that we have done and all the things they did in Europe, which is a very extensive operation, OSS activities in there, and in Yugoslavia they did fantastic jobs. All of these things, the things that have gone on and the little pieces that we talk about here, contribute to the doctrine and to the training program, so that now the training programs that you all have, I think, are so, I mean, they're incredible. I mean, I don't think that what I've heard in the last few days that I've been here, I don't think you've left a stone unturned on training a student. I mean, they have every opportunity. I felt that, you know, the only thing that I could add is to re-emphasize what you already have, and that is, there's no question that you have a very careful selection process. The way they go through this thing is that these guys have to sort of they get a evaluation on whether they got the right mental attitude, whether they have the right physical stamina to stay with it, and the heart, you know, they stick to it, and the intelligence to go with it. And then you go on in this extensive training program, which I can't help but say is fantastic. I could hardly add to that. The only thing I can add, I think, is that I feel that I can't help but emphasize to everybody, and that is that when they have a specific operation, there is no substitute for planning in the most extreme detail. They have to go through it. They have to have done it before it's done, maybe 100 times. Think about it. It becomes a part of them. They know it like the back of their hand. They're like their first names. So that when they get into the execution phase, planning in extreme detail execution with extreme violence, and speed. And
As you did at the bridge.
that's right. And well, but as I would say, is you would have to do in a place like Iraq, which I'm sure, I don't know what's happened, but I'm sure that they've done jobs in Iraq. When it comes out, will be just fabulous to tell and most exciting stories to tell. You see, I think one of the great criticisms I have of the military services was when we weren't successful in Iran. It was a terrible, shameful thing. They try to blame it on the president. Me as a military guy, I blame it on the military. They didn't. What didn't they do? One is apparently they didn't select the right commander. Number two, they didn't plan it in the extreme detail. They weren't planned for contingencies, and they never rehearsed. They rehearsal, and then it would have gone off like clockwork. Remember what the Israel did when they went into
Entebbe.
Yeah, marvelous, fantastic. Well, that's the kind of stuff. But I can hardly say that we can contribute much to your training today compared on our past experiences, other than to say, that what I've said already. And we can tell little stories and say that, for example, I talked to the guy today about destroying ammunition dumps. I thought a big expert, I started out trying to destroy ammunition by blowing it up with explosives. That's stupid. The best way to destroy ammunition is with fire. For the most part, fire. Now, we destroyed rows of bombs that were touching each other, and you set one off, they'll blow the whole thing up, But when you're going to destroy an ammunition dump, or something else. So that ammunition dump that went off for about 3 days, we finally we started trying to demolish it with explosives, and then we gave that up and used fire. Fire. Boy, that just went up like mad. That's it.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay,
sir.
guys.
I appreciate it.
I hope it came out all right.